Greetings all. Welcome to the 2023 TPLA 7 Form Symposium. This year, we're going to be talking about the teacher-student relationship, something that's very core to Star Wars. Helping me to do this is our esteemed panel. Let me give the introductions here. First of all, I would say, our good friends John and Ben from here, but joining us also are Alan Venable from the Saber Martial Arts Foundation, David Honeycutt, who, of course, General Sun with us, Faisal Mien from Silver Sabers Academy in England, and our special guest, Gene Ching from, Inside Kung Fu and all kinds of stuff. If not the beating heart of American Kung Fu, at least one of its vital organs. So welcome all to the program. All right.
Good to be here. Video here going.
All right. Okay, so like I said, the teacher-student relationship is something that's very important in Star Wars. From the very first beginnings, where Luke meets Obi Wan and becomes his student for all of 15 minutes, and then goes off and saves the galaxy. But the idea of that, of finding a mentor, of finding somebody who will bring you to your greatest potential, or to your greatest aptitude, is something that runs through the entire series, and probably comes to a largest culmination in the recent Ahsoka series, which has several sets of teachers and students, all dealing with different aspects of that particular relationship. Most of what we're going to be talking about is from the Asian perspective. We are all all of us here are Asian martial artists who are from traditional Asian martial arts, which really focuses on lineage and passing it down, and really focuses on that teacher-student relationship. So we're going to explore that, how it intersects, and how you can then take the stuff that we do here, whether it be for the sport or for the martial arts or anything like that, and adapt it to your practice. Make sure that you can get something out of it, and bring some of the fantasy elements from Star Wars and stuff like that into your practice, and that can actually help you. So we will begin thusly. So gentlemen, why don't we kind of go around and maybe talk a little bit about our own teachers and where we're coming from. And why don't we start with you, Gene, and then we'll kind of go from my standpoint. It will be going counterclockwise, but we'll go over to Faisal next.
Very good. You'll have to forgive me because I'm actually coming in from Fan Expo, San Francisco. So I'm in a big con right now, and I've tucked away in a corner. So hopefully I can keep the transmission going. And if there's any crazy cosplay going past me, I'll give you guys
right on.
We'll be cutting out at 12:45 because I want to catch William Shatner's talk.
Sure.
But my main master, I've had many masters. My main master in Kung Fu was Wing Lam, Huang Wing Lam. I'm discipled under the Shaolin monk Shi Cheng. I studied under many Kung Fu masters, many Japanese sword masters. Right now I'm training under Merrick Dorf in Iaido. I also trained under several fencing masters, notably Michael Testaro and William Godler. So it's kind of a big question for me in terms of what my master is or who my masters are, and also being part of
sure.
I got a chance to, there's that old thing, somebody teaches you one lesson, they're a master for life. And if I abide by that, I always try to get a lesson from everybody I interviewed. So that's an incomprehensible amount of teachers.
Yes. But
Anyway,
I think that, yeah, that's a good point too. And most of us are going to have the same answer, that we've studied with a lot of people, but we have a couple of principal teachers that we tend to go by. So why don't we go over to you, Faisal?
Hi everyone. It's great to be here first of all, and a really interesting topic that winds me up all the time. So I'm really open to hearing
Yeah.
how everyone deals with all of this. Um, my teacher for nearly 30 years now is a gentleman by the name of Michael Acton, who is a fifth generation disciple of the Wu style lineage of Tai Chi. And I met him almost by accident. My younger brother decided that we were going to go and learn Tai Chi because, like, of Jet Li. We watched some Jet Li films and we had to go and learn Tai Chi, and that's how it was. And you all remember it, right? And he dragged me to a class, and I got thrown around like a rag doll, and I was fascinated. I came from a fencing background. I used to fence saber, and this was in the days before saber was a conventional weapon with priority and the rest of it. And authority came from aggression, and there was this guy who could just absorb that and just bounce it straight back out, and it almost defied the laws of physics until I worked out it was just like Newton's laws, like billiard balls. There's just natural physics at work, and you just have to ride that stuff. And if you can do it, then and I said to him, how do you do that? And I'd met people in my life who could do incredible things. And every time you ask them, how do you do that? They're just like, I just do. And that wound me up. That drove me mad, because it's like, well, what's the point of being so good if you can't explain to me how you got so good? And this time I asked Michael, how do you get so good? He said, stand like this, breathe like this, settle. And it began, and it's 30 years in now. And he's still showing me how to stand and how to breathe and how to settle. And after my father, I mean, he is my second father. He's been with me through, when I started with him, I was a very young man. And he's just been with me all the way. And he's never told me I had to make any choices about who I could train with. I've always been free to go and explore whatever with whoever. And that's how come, I'm here with you guys doing lightsabers and stuff. He always embraced that. Wow. Yeah, what a guy. I'll leave it and let you go on.
Hello, I was muted. So anyway, yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think that goes to something that we'll probably touch on a bunch, which is a lot of times this relationship between teacher and student becomes very parental. The Chinese terms for that we use for teacher are often the same for father or for uncle or all of that kind of thing. So that's there. Alan, how about you? Why don't you give us a little bit about your background?
Sure. My first teacher was my mom. She whooped the hell out of me when I was a kid, and put instilled in me, the want to be like the people I saw on TV. And she basically said, okay, if you want to be like Jackie Chan, roll all over the house, at least you got to learn how to do it well and know how to do it without hurting yourself. So basically, when I became of age, I started with Taekwondo, as most American kids do. And then I learned that there was many more martial arts, of course. And when I went to college, I started doing Kung Fu with Grandmaster Mike Leone. He was, of course, he wasn't Grandmaster at the time, but he introduced me to a way of learning from other masters. So, like, my masters are, the definition of master in our school is somebody that makes other masters. So he introduced me to his teachers, Grandmaster Pan Chen Fu. At the time, was in Canada, but he was he came down with his, steel fists and hit everybody in the head. It was great. Grandmaster Jerry Cook who is, basically just a walking legend. He knows so many forms and so many people that it's insane. Grandmaster Songbek, who is on the Korean side of what we do. Shihan Dana Abbott, who's on the Japanese side of what we do. And Grandmaster Jin Hung Lee, who is Jet Li's older brother in the Beijing Wushu Institute. So I'm a man of many masters in many disciplines, and I've also had some great instruction by Richard Marsden and the guys at the Phoenix Society for Historical Swordsmanship on the HEMA side. So I've got a lot of those. Some Filipino martial arts masters as well, although they don't like being called master at all. So it's a whole thing. But yeah, that's like the Cliff's Notes of the teachers I've had. But I've been doing that for 3 decades now. So all of them, much like Faisal said, all of them still go back to the basics, teach us how to stand, teach us how to breathe. Kind of where I believe most masters go, right? It's okay, you're having trouble with this. Here, let's start from the beginning.
Yes, yeah, and that's something, again, it'll be a common theme. And I think probably all of us will be guilty of saying stuff like that as well. I know I am. Like someone says, oh, how do we do this? Well, go back to your Form 1. Yeah. All right. How about we go over to Damon? Damon, why don't you give us, even though we've talked about it before, but we'll go into it for the folks at home.
Cool. Well, thank you. It's all beautiful to hear everyone's stories through their relationship with their teachers. It's just really incredible. My first start was Danzanru Jiu-Jitsu, and at the Medford Judo Academy. And sadly, that dojo burnt to the ground in the fires out in Oregon years ago. And so that was there for over 60 years. And I learned with Professor Nolte and Professor Shihorn. And then I started learning Kempo karate under a man named Dr. La Tourette, and then Michael Boyce, who later his son and I became very close as teacher-student. And so there's a whole family thing there that's multi-generational as far as lineage in that side. And then I got the honor to train with Paulie Zink for years due to a letter of recommendation written by Paul and Susie Greeley in the yoga world. And I studied with him for many years, and then went to the Beijing Opera to study with Qi Jinguo. And then eventually moved out east to refine my training with two-time all-around wushu champion Hu Jinchang, who was also in films with like Jet Li back in the day. And all of these people, and then there was Zheng Yu Hong, and then I had where Gene and I kind of have an interesting karma, is where we mix with the fencing world, because I trained with Gay Jacobson, was her name then, or Gay DeSaro, back just for a very brief amount of time, but I learned so much in that brief amount of time because she was such a great teacher and very formidable. So heavy mentors, heavy influences. Yeah, everything I think filters through the Daosheng Piquo Man that I got from Paulie, I think because he was such a unique individual. It was like training with some sort of warrior wizard in a garage in Burbank for years. And I think I came with the foundation, but he reset my foundation and made it so I could go on and get refinement from teachers that I think without his training I wouldn't been accessible to. And then I took a whole career change and toured the world as a professional dancer and worked with the lightsaber community for years in New York. And then when I got done dancing, I ran into Ben Judkins, and he pulled me back into the lightsaber community again. And then Chad and I became great friends, and here we all are now, and it's making things happen. So thank you so very much. I hope that was my elevator spiel.
There you go. There
Yeah.
you go. Perfect. I see Gene is dodging some lightsaber strikes over there. So that's
This is gathering. We've got Mark Hamill, Trigger. We've got the whole Rebels voice cast. It's huge.
perfect. Why not? All right. Why don't we go over to Ben?
Hi, everybody. I am fighting a cold, so if I start coughing, please forgive me. So, my main my main foothold in the martial arts right now is in Southern Chinese art called Wing Chun. So my teachers actually are all kind of centered around that particular sphere. My main teacher is a Wing Chun instructor named John Nielsen. His teacher was Ip Ching, who was one of Ip Man's children. So that actually kind of lends another aspect of this teacher-student relationship when it actually stops just being philosophically a familial relationship and actually becomes a somewhat dysfunctional familial relationship in real life. And John is a really interesting guy because in addition to being a martial arts teacher, he's an academic teacher, as am I. I have a PhD. I've been a professor. And, he and I were both working at the University of Utah when I was studying with him. And he thought quite a bit about what it meant to be a martial arts teacher and the very strange expectations that students bring to this, how they undermine the actual process of teaching, why it is people have these expectations, right? How you should formulate this relationship. It was kind of sad that he can't be here because, he has just a ton to say on this particular topic. My other main teacher is also kind of a member of the lightsaber community, but he himself is a very formidable Wing Chun guy. His name is Anthony Iglesias. Anthony is my I say all kinds of stuff with Anthony, actually. At some level, it becomes very difficult to separate this stuff out, right? Anthony is a great guy. If you need to know anything about a blade, whether that blade is made out of plasma or steel or wood, Anthony's kind of my guy, for all of that stuff. But again, Anthony is someone who has thought quite a bit about, the ethics of teacher-student relationships, and it's kind of a specialty. So those are the two sets of teachers that I'm kind of most directly bringing into this conversation. Though I do think it's interesting to think about, what we mean, right? I think we make assumptions about what it means to be a teacher in the martial arts world, but of course we have lots of coaches, we have lots of mentors, right? And it's kind of worthwhile, especially when we're thinking about the Jedi and those kinds of, more holistic relationships, to branch this out and, ask some big questions about, what fundamentally, what do we expect of a teacher, right? What does it mean to be a teacher?
Let's go with John over here, who is our lone Japanese stylist.
Hi, obviously I'm John. So my first introduction into what I would consider significant martial arts was actually a medieval reenactment society called the SCA. Well, it's not a traditional martial art. I would definitely say that Fast Eddie School of Swordsmanship that I graduated from was a very eye-opening experience, and I owe Edward of Schaumburg, who was the sergeant at arms that ran that, a lot. But my traditional martial arts study started several years later, and my first master was actually my wife. That's how we met. Victoria Van Fleet was a student of Toshishiro Obata in Shinkendo, Toyamaru, and Aikido. And she came back to our hometown of Flint and began teaching after studying with him for a few years in Los Angeles. So I met her, started doing martial arts with her, began our relationship. And then we eventually went out there, and at a certain point, we kind of became equals based on her decision. And then Mr. Obata became my primary instructor. Now he's in semi-retirement, has been for a few years. He still does seminars and teaches classes at the dojo at Hambu, the home dojo, occasionally. But now his son, Obata Yukishiro, is now the Soke, or headmaster of the school, and he's now my master, in addition. And as far as like traditional martial arts, other than the things I've done with Master Anonymous, who I also consider a master, I have a lot of other, like Ben said, coaches and friends and people that have taught me things and that I've learned a lot about. Even technically, one of my students in swordsmanship, right, in that started our group in Grand Rapids, I consider him, certainly a mentor, right? Because he had been doing Aikido longer than I had, and when we met and I started teaching him some swordsmanship, I learned a great deal about martial arts in general from him and about his perspective and experience. So very much in the way we see uh expounding on Ben's idea in point that in the Jedi, right, we see the temple as like this holistic thing. And we see, especially during the Clone Wars cartoon, we see Ahsoka train with Plo Koon and Jocasta Noon and Aayla Secura, and she has these little bits and pieces that she picks up from these other masters, which fortunately seem to temper her compared to Anakin's teaching style. So
Yeah.
I like to think that, you know, certainly all of us, I'm sure, by all of your great experiences with many masters, can appreciate that. So
Yeah. And I think real quick, I'll go through mine real quick, which is I principally I studied Yang style Tai Chi with a Gabriel Chin, who I've written about on the blog a couple of times. And I am currently a disciple of Ma Yu, who's the son of Ma Xianda, who's one of the grandfathers, godfathers of Wushu, and it's a very, very steeped lineage, which I am very proud to be a part of. But what you were saying, John, is pretty a good kind of segue, which is you don't necessarily just have one teacher. And I think while we have Gene here, one thing I'd like to hear on your perspective is the Jedi seem to be very much kind of like an organization like Shaolin, right? In that it's they're kind of set up like warrior monks at the front, in the first. Now, how they've turned out, yeah, it's a hodgepodge or whatever. But it kind of started out with that idea, even though it wasn't really flushed out. Do you resonate anything specifically in the whole thing with that specific lineage or history, or anything else specifically that you might come to mind?
I just spent the last 2 weekends with the abbot of Shaolin Temple. He
Yeah.
was he's doing this big campaign, global thing. He'd come from Argentina. He went to Australia. He went to Venice. There's this big sort of movement to organize and standardize the teaching. So funny you should mention that. I think there is definitely sort of an implied monastic sense in the way that the Jedi represent themselves. I mean, it's very soft, in the sense that I mean, we don't really get presented with a sutra, so to speak, or any codification beyond these sort of fantastic exercises and training sequences. I think it's interesting to contrast that with the whole Sith, the master's student relation, which is very one-to-one, which is kind of mathematically not very solid, right?
Right. Yes.
I mean, but it's fascinating to see how Shaolin is evolving right now, with the abbot and his control of the temple. When I first was going to Shaolin, it was still the Wild Wild West. It was still kind of from the Cultural Revolution. There was no abbot in place. There was a lot of crazy tourist stuff going on. Very, I mean, almost capitalistic in a way. And now it's sort of shifted where they're trying to bring Buddhism back, which is, of course, very challenging in a communist nation. It was fascinating. It's fascinating to see that sort of hierarchical thing, especially coming from that Chinese perspective. We have that root in Confucianism that sort of demands that master-student relationship to be very rigid in a way. There's the 5 relationships, the husband-wife, leader, followers, teacher, student, elder brother, younger brother. I missed one. What was the other one? Husband, is it husband, wife? Anyway, the 5 relationships where that I think gets misinterpreted by Chinese a lot. One of the things I think that Confucianism propounds is that this only works if the leader is good, right? And that kind of gets missed in that notion of leader, follower, or emperor and people, right? It presumes the notion of the benevolent tyrant, and whether that exists or not gets really complex, particularly in the martial arts, where you get sort of martial arts cults and such.
Yes. Oh, definitely. Yeah, all of that's very, very true. I think also the kind of mystique that is put on the Jedi in a lot of cases, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but in Last Jedi, there was a distinct attempt to try to peel that back and to try to see it as more of a kind of integrated thing, although some people did not appreciate that. But yeah, so like lineage, I think, is one of those things, and when we pick it up with Luke Skywalker and all of that, the lineage of the Jedi is all dispersed, and it's very in the past, and it's very foggy, which I think for a lot of, like, especially Western practitioners, a lot of the Asian stuff really is, just because of lack of history and all that kind of stuff. So, Faisal, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff coming out, and I think before we go forwards, that there are, even within the sort of Oriental traditions, still a lot of different churches and a lot of different ways to perceive that relationship. And we've mentioned Buddhism, and we've mentioned Confucianism, and they have a particular approach. But in Taoism is also quite a significant player in that game, and it has a very particular approach to the relationship between power and service. And when we talk about masters and students, what is a master? I mean, when we tried to give a title to my teacher, and he's okay with Lao Sha. We're allowed to call him Lao Sha because it means teacher, but you call him Shifu, and he's just like, it doesn't mean anything. Like, why not? That's what we see in the films and everything. You go, because you get in a taxi. If the guy knows where to take you, that is the Shifu for the journey. It's
Right.
So the language that we use. It'd be nice to hear people's thoughts from my perspective. If somebody is teaching you, whether that's contracted or whatever, or whether it's even accidental or whatever, but if there's a relationship there where one person's teaching another, is that one person is the master and one person is the student? Because that's quite distinct from a lineage holder who has been named by a teacher as this is someone.
That is a good point, but I will point out that I did not say master. I say teacher and student, but we tend to put that master in there, especially when we're talking about Jedi, especially when we're talking about this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So
and
when we say
to make, what is the difference between a teacher and a master, right? And for me, like all of my teachers, and everybody can chime in on this one, the way it was explained to me by Gabriel was master is not a noun, it's a verb, right? And so mastery is something that you do. You don't call yourself that. That's not a thing that you want to settle on. Now, of course, that's just teacher talk, but that's kind of how I was taught. I don't know how does everybody else kind of approach that particular master language.
I can just chime in just with Star Wars. I mean, everyone's always calling each other Master Jedi this and Master Jedi that. It kind of feels like,
more like Mr.
Oh yes, Master Baggins. I mean, it's just like it becomes this like kind of classist thing of like I've come from a certain class of strata.
True.
Therefore, all of a sudden, this gets applied to me because I'm wearing robes, and so that's just kind of something to think about. I mean, for me, when I think of the last character in my style, Mun, gate, I feel like teacher and student always go through a gate together, like intergenerationally, things like this, arriving when they arrive. And I think through time, and when it comes to lineage, it's like, are you doing your martial arts with the power of your lineage, or are you doing it about your lineage, making it political in some aspect? And so that's another thing to think about with that. I know Polly did not like to be called Sifu at all. And most of my teachers who I worked with, they acknowledged certain titles, but also they were just very human as their presentation of their teachings too. And I think that humanity can go really above title and politic, but there's sometimes appropriate when you're in the form of like, this has to be tick, 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 tick. It's like kind of like, I don't know, grammar in a paragraph or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. The I don't know. I agree with you, and most of my teachers were the same way. They did not like being called, Shifu or Laosha. Gabriel used to say Laosha meant old rotten thing. But the that, like you said, it's used, the term master is almost used like Mister, right? A lot of times, but I still think that people put a lot of hang a lot of stuff on there.
If if somebody calls another person master without them introducing themselves as master, that's one thing, right? It's an honorific. In a lot of Asian culture, there's honorifics as far as the amount of respect they're giving you. So for example, in a Japanese dojo, you have your senpai, who's the student that's a little bit more senior to you, but then you have your sensei, and then you have the next level, your Shihan, and then your Shijo, the founder, right? So there are many levels of master. In a lot of the Chinese and even Korean stuff that I've done, master is up there with professor. Sometimes much like the honorifics, right? It's a title, it's a position, but it's always given to you. It's never really something that you introduce yourself with. The only reason that people call me Master Venable is because somebody else introduced me as Master Venable, because that person gave me the honor and the respect, and so that's kind of how that goes. I introduce myself by my first name, that's kind of how it is. And most of my teachers did this exact same thing. Most of them did not want to have even the title on their diplomas, right? We all as martial artists get our fun little certificates and diplomas when we've achieved a certain rank, certain belt, and in our school, at least, we also give you a position certificate, and it's kind of like getting your doctorate or your master's diploma, right? So that's kind of how that goes. But I mean, even in Western culture, right, it would be correct to call somebody master if they got their master's degree, in that particular subject. But I think it's a matter of the both negative connotations of the word, thanks to history, and also a lot of people's view of the master-student relationship, or like our school is very much both kind of Jedi and Sith, as far as there is a private instruction available, but majority of it is a classroom structure, much like Yoda and the younglings, or that sort of thing. But in the end, it tends to become the Grand Master, or whoever the lineage holder is, and their small council of people, and then those are also masters that go down into almost like a tree, like a family tree. You have your patriarch, and then or matriarch, and then the rest. So that's kind of how I've seen most schools and most organizations, right? Even most organizations, right? Your CEO or your chairman and your board members and all that fun stuff. it's all the same. It's just the word that we use for it and the connotation we give to the word. So as far as the word master goes, it's an honorific in my mind, and usually most of my students, it's the, hey, you put in more work than I have so far, so I'm going to call you that.
Yeah, Faisal, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it didn't occur to me till just now, but actually, as you're talking, as Alan's explaining it as an honorific, it is literally, if you come from an Asian family, I have a different title for my mum's sister, my father's brothers, my father's younger brothers. Everyone has that and it's just such a normal sort of way of referring to people, not necessarily by their name, but by their relationship to you. And that is a completely standard. It's across so many different languages and cultures that you see that is still prevalent, where people have, they still exist primarily as family units. It's only where we have like the 2.4 kids scenario and suburbia and stuff like that, where you find it becomes mystified to have that kind of a language to describe your relationship interpersonally with all these people who are contributing towards the community. And that's curious. I hadn't thought of it in those terms before, but yeah, food for thought. Oh.
So my thought, right, like Alan said, there's a great deal of, in Japanese martial arts, there's a title for every relationship. I mean, just about, it's like kohai, senpai, sensei. Sensei is super generic. Whoever is teaching the class that day, the sensei, period. Right? They're the sensei. So even if, Mr. Obata is, steps in to do something on the mat that he hasn't done in a while, and his son is running class, right, who's the headmaster of the school, and it is sensei on the mat. As soon as he steps on the mat, you can either use his current honorific of Kaiso or school founder or sensei. It's perfectly acceptable, right? He's sensei, which gets confusing when, you have a question and you're like Obata sensei and like three people turn and look at you, right? Because his wife's standing over there and she's Obata sensei also, right? But in Star Wars, it's the master is a position and a title, because it's Padawan Knight Master. Right, master is a rank that's bestowed by the council. Mm-hmm. So, but if you notice when Obi-Wan meets, and of course this could just be, George's, writing out of order, but Obi-Wan never introduces himself as Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? Or I was once a Jedi Master. He's like, I was once a Jedi. Mm-hmm. Right. So, and then at certain points in the EU, they use Jedi as a rank also. Like you're a Padawan and then a Jedi Knight, right? Or you're a Jedi Padawan? Anyway, it gets a little funny sometimes in some of their usage in the EU, which makes me wonder if George ultimately settled on Master as the rank, because Padawan's just a made-up word. I mean, all words are made up, right? But instead of using Squire, right, which you would, right, when I was 5 years old, right, and I was first really wrapping my head around Star Wars that I'd had for a couple of years, I was like, well, if there's a Jedi Knight, then Luke's a Squire, until he becomes a Jedi Knight also, right? He's a Jedi Squire, and that's where my brain was at for the huge bulk of my childhood until Episode 1, right, when they say no, a Padawan is what a trainee is called. Mm-hmm. So. Go ahead.
I mean, putting two and two together, right? So we discussed that there's masters and then there are designated lineage holders, people who have been named by their teachers as propagators of the knowledge in a complete form. It won't be exactly the same as the person who passed it down. It'll be a new form because it's a new person, but they are going to be able to propagate with the blessing of their teacher, right? So from that perspective, and you're like, from the Star Wars perspective, the rank of master, the title of master, has been bestowed upon that individual by the council that has decided they are fit for having a Padawan of their own. That's a very particular thing. It's a very specific thing. It's a lineage holder, essentially.
Absolutely, except for Anakin, who was never a master but had a Padawan.
He was the chosen one.
Right.
Very true, and chosen by George Lucas. The story came out, didn't it? That about Ahsoka's invention, where Dave Filoni was sitting at the table and George Lucas just came in and said, "Yeah, Anakin has a Padawan," and he's like, "No, he doesn't." He goes, "Yes, Anakin has a Padawan." And so they made Ahsoka his Padawan. Anyway, so yes, but a good, obviously talking about that master relation, because as we go forward, we're not meaning that somebody has, when we are talking about master, we're going to say this word, we don't mean somebody who has control over somebody else. We mean somebody who has achieved something, somebody who has been given this as an honorable title, all of that kind of thing. So we've got kind of that out of the way, because that tension between teacher and student, right, is something that happens throughout the series in many different ways. From the very first one, from Yoda telling Luke not to go, not to stop his training, and yet he goes off anyway. To the flip side in Last Jedi, which of course we'll be talking about more when we get into teacher disgruntled teachers.
Obi-Wan and Anakin arguing in Padme's apartment.
What?
Obi-Wan and Anakin arguing in Padme's apartment. It's like, we'll find out who the attacker is, and Obi-Wan's like, no, we're not.
Right.
And then Anakin's like, yeah, we will. It's what we're supposed to do, right? And he's like,
Right.
we're not going to go through this again. You're
Right.
going to do what I say.
Right. Yeah.
We've all had that student.
Yes. And that's definitely a good thing. So there is that tension between master and student and all that. And even if you go into the Clone Wars and you've watched the Clone Wars and you get into something like Barriss Offee and that whole storyline, like, have they ever talked about what happened with her master?
Luminara?
Yeah, after the whole Barriss Offee thing.
No, she didn't make it out of the Clone Wars or the Jedi Purge.
Right, but there was some time between the.
I don't think they've ever touched on it that I'm aware of.
Yeah, well, whatever. She was probably very disappointed. Anyway, so yes.
Out. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Gene. It was a pleasure having you always.
And let's
Take care,
continue.
Gene.
We'll try to get you on again soon.
Yeah, Damon, Ben, great to see you guys again.
See you too, sir.
And the rest of you, great to meet you. I hope we'll have this conversation later.
All right. Have a good one.
Nice to meet you.
Live long and prosper.
And switching, we're mixing we're doing dangerous mixing here. All right. So yeah. So anyway, we've got that. So the lesson that is being taught there with that thing of leaving too soon, because if you look at it just at the surface, it almost seems like they're saying, yes, you should totally just take off because everything will turn out right if you do that. Right? Because Luke takes off and he wins, and
But he doesn't win. Gets his hand
Right.
cut off. He gets beat by Darth Vader. And right, I mean, there's a super important lesson there, because the progression is that, he follows Obi-Wan's advice in the first movie, in A New Hope, and wins. He disregards their advice, goes off, and yes, he doesn't accomplish anything except put his friends in more danger, because they were fine without him. They got away, but they had to come back for him. So, so there was a lesson learned, right? And then he goes back to Yoda's like, all right, I was wrong.
Right.
I did it. I'm back to finish it. Well, no, you're fine. Now you just have to go kill Darth Vader. And then he goes and he's like, I really don't think I should kill him, right? I can do something about this. And Luke's right this time. He was wrong last time, and he's correct this time because now he's an adult, right? He's grown up. He's wise enough to not rush in headlong and bash his face against something he can't deal with.
Right.
So for 12-year-olds, right? It's a
Right,
story.
right.
It's a story for 12-year-olds, right?
Right.
Listen to your parents until sure you're not ready to, right? Until you're sure you know better, which every 17-year-old absolutely does.
Yes. Now to extend that lesson and metaphor into the martial arts world, for those of us who are studying with any of us in our organizations or anything like that, here's your window into our crazy ass minds, right? Because these are the things that you're weighing. On one hand, a lot of times we'll have a student, and you chime in with your personal experiences, where that they need this one thing that they are maybe consistently avoiding, or they won't go for it, or there's something blocking them from getting that, and the frustration is building and building and building, and often you become the receptacle for that, and that's your job, right, as a teacher or whatever. But I think one of the lessons there too, when he comes back and he says, okay, I'm ready to finish my training, it wasn't necessarily, at least this is how I interpret it. Yoda basically said, okay, you've come to that realization, and that's pretty much the realization that you needed, which is a little bit of humility. You're not invincible, and you'll get your head cut off if you're not careful. So and that's one of those things, like there will be times when your teacher will tell you something that you do not understand. It doesn't make any sense to you. It may seem contradictory in some cases, but if you have stayed with a teacher long enough and you do trust them, at some point you do have to trust them to say, okay, I don't know where you're going with this, but I'll trust you. And again, we would bring in another property. It's just like Karate Kid, right? Paint the fence, and all that kind of stuff. So we definitely have to do that. So any thoughts on those?
Well, I think it's interesting to consider the fact that we all decided that we needed a martial arts teacher at about exactly the same time we decided we all needed a Jedi Knight, right? In the West, both of these are phenomenon. They're both products of the 1970s. And like I said, we got nothing but teachers in our lives. You think about yourself as a 12-year-old, you're surrounded by teachers. You get older, you're a college student, you're surrounded by teachers and coaches, right? So I think it's important to go back to this question of what in the 1970s, what is perceived as having gone wrong with our relationship with educational authority, that suddenly a different sort of instruction is considered to be necessary broadly throughout society, kind of throughout pop culture. Everybody's coming to the same realization. We need a guru. We need a master. And suddenly a teacher isn't cutting it, right? And I think that we should think about, what is the need? What is the perceived need that people have? Because that then explains, I think, a lot of the frustrations that students have with their teachers and the frustrations that teachers have with their students, right? You wanted to talk about the, embittered Luke, the bitter martial arts teacher, and the frustrated student. I think, there's this cultural genesis that happens in the 1970s, but it's also kind of the root of a lot of what goes wrong later on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we are all a product of our time. And as if you've read any of my blog posts or read any of Ben's papers or blog posts or anything like that, you probably aware that we're constantly saying that most of the things that we assume are very, very old are actually not that old. And we put a lot of that mystique onto it, very much like we did with the Jedi when they were first mentioned in Star Wars, where we all had our own ideas of what they were. But yeah, so that's another thing, that a lot of things that we project into the past are not really things of the past, but are things of the present that we are projecting onto the people of the past. in this case, we're presenting them into the very far past. That is sort of like our very far future, or something like that. Faisal, well, go ahead.
I mean, yeah. So what happened in the late 20th sort of? There were two world wars, and there was a revolution, and one of the aims of that revolution was to wipe out anybody who had ancestral knowledge and replace them with people who could do industrialized stuff. So we did have a period of time where on one side of the planet there's this revolution going on. On this side of the planet we got two world wars with however many generations that were massively depleted, and we got used to existing without elders. And then we realized that was really, really bad. That I'm just putting that out there, because we've got this idea of apprenticeship. Pre-education, there was apprenticeship where people literally just sat with people who knew how to do something and inherited it. And quite often that were the sons and daughters of the tradespeople. They would just be, so the idea of one-on-one education, I suspect, I mean, orcas do it. They teach their children how to hunt in the ocean with this one-on-one relationship, apprenticeship. That's the natural evolutionarily pathway to education. We then replaced that with something else because we had these things that had to be addressed. I mean, how old are universities? Universities about 800 AD or something like that, and that's where we start to see this shift. And then all of a sudden, boom, we're without gurus. They've become these mystified things. We don't have them anymore. The closest you're going to get to it are your grandparents, for example. So how old is the idea of mastery? And I think I think it's pre-linguistic. I think it's older than language.
Well, yeah. So the one-on-one relationship in education, obviously that was abandoned for society because it is completely inefficient. You cannot teach people one by one. So there were that was probably the thing of that. But I think what you're talking about there, and I know a little bit about this from education, my background in education, is you're actually probably talking about the means of education that happened post Industrial Revolution, because by the, I don't know, early to mid 20th century, education had stopped being a place to educate people in knowledge of the world and more to prepare them for life in an industrialized world. So it was school grades you on punctuality, on following directions, and conditioning you to mind-numbing busy work, right? And that, I think, for the educational system at large, that kind of went there. And now, of course, it wasn't a flip. It happened slowly, and we got to this point here. However, I think this need for a guru or anything like that is something that can be seen throughout history, like you said. And it's not always positive, because it's probably the same type of thing that gets us involved with cult leaders and all of that kind of thing. And there is a very whisper thin line between a lot of martial arts and cultish behavior. So we have to admit that, which of course does fit in with the whole Jedi thing. The Jedi can very much well be seen as sort of like a cult. Damon, you wanted to chime in on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, a lot of it is what I've seen is bringing it back to trusting the teacher and cooperating. Just because one doesn't understand something doesn't mean one can't cooperate with it to go through the process. And I think what happens is a lot of people are looking at a kind of punctuated ratio-based kind of thought rather than an embodied intelligence that takes a process. Just the difference between pouring metal to make a blade and forging the thing over time. There's a different process about it. One may look a certain way, but you get those Amazon swords or whatever, and then you get a real, you know what I'm saying, and you get an actual one that's like really made by someone who knows what they're doing. There's to to someone who doesn't, it's someone, some people just don't know the difference because they haven't been brought through that embodied process, and having patience with that embodied process just is that patience. And it's, so then you throw in economics, and then I think when economics get involved, and then aspects of patience gets to pay the bills, and there you go, and that's a whole other thing. And so then you get the disgruntled teacher throwing a lightsaber over, you know, I don't need you to pay my rent, so I'm going to throw your lightsaber over the cliff.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing. And when people, and I suppose we can open this can of worms, right? It's an hour in, right? Last Jedi, right? One of the big contentious parts was lots of people hated the way Luke was in that movie, right? Oh, he shouldn't be like that. How could he be so negative and be so down on everything and everything like that? And of course, the chorus of every kind of teacher in the world goes, he's a teacher. That's why he's so down on everybody.
You know, it's something I actually thought about. You know, Chad Yoda was pretty disgruntled too. I mean, 900 years old, you reach.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
Come on. I mean, geez. I mean, he kind of had some pushback with Luke on some stuff. I mean, you know, the difference is, you know, I mean, Yoda didn't even have his, supposedly. I mean, we never saw him use his lightsaber in those earlier films or nothing. Maybe, you know, he just was kind of so tired of himself, he put it on the shelf and it collected dust. You know, sometimes you turn your clarinet into a lamp, you're just kind of done.
Right. That's true. That's true. What is everybody's take on that, on Luke's evolution in the Last Jedi? Did you resonate with it, or was that something that was
I thought it was very human. I resonated with the humanity of it, even though, I mean, however, you know, us being teachers, we're going to feel a call, and you know, I would of course get pulled back into things, you know, like I do, you know, but the initial reaction was like, yeah, of course, like, who are you? What's going on? Where did you get this? What, you're showing up with this?
Yeah.
I would say that there was no other way for Luke to have been.
Yep.
As much as Mark Hamill saw him as, you know, the beacon of hope and blah blah blah, tag 30 years onto that, my man.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff happened, and they already established in The Force Awakens that, you know, Ben nearly killed him, you know, destroyed his academy, you know, this thing that he spent probably 25, 30 years building. And so what else could he have been but done? And you know, why isn't he going around as a superhero in the galaxy? He's done, guys. It's the only way it could have happened. Like, why wasn't he involved with the First Order? Like, he didn't show up on Starkiller Base and, you know, destroy everything, because he could have. No, he was done, and there's no other way to explain that scene on the cliff. And every time I talk to somebody that has that, you know, thing like, oh, they did him wrong, I'm like, how would you have done it? Okay, then here's all the plot holes that you just gave me.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like, we can drive some trucks through these things here.
Yeah, and I'm like, for a person that loves, I also love the EU, and I love that stuff. And I talked to a lot of people that were like, well, they got to bring this back because it made more sense in the expanded universe. I'm like, they hit Chewie with the moon. Explain that to a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Explain to a 5-year-old, where is Chewie?
Yeah.
And then they go,
Yeah. Yes, it's definitely one of those things. And I think one of the things specifically was that I get a lot of pushback on, a lot of people saying stuff about, is, why did Luke try to kill Kylo, right? Why did he have that kind of thing? Now, technically he didn't. He almost did. He lit his lightsaber while he was in the room, but then he had second thoughts, and it just so happened that Ben Solo woke up. Okay, fine. What would have driven him to that position? There's a whole lot of stuff. And I think we all, I don't know if you've had classmates or have had students like this, where you realize maybe it was a mistake teaching them how to do this, because maybe they're cruel, maybe they're starting to become a bully, you know, maybe
Oh,
there's something that some sort of behavior that you need to withdraw in there. And there, who's got
oh,
a Faisal? You
I
got
got,
one?
yeah. I mean, so we're talking about lineage and we're talking about masters and students. Um, I think that conversation has to include forms. It has to, right? Because if it comes down to you sort of trying to help someone who has no control to discover a place where they are actually able to focus their mind on a non-repeating pattern that has to expand across half an hour of their life. And it's like, look, dude, it's really simple. If you can't do this, I can't teach you. And if you don't want to learn this, then I don't want to teach you. And if I see by the end of that form, I don't care how bad it is or how good it is, it doesn't make any difference. What I want to see is the effort that you're putting in to try and keep this under control so that you don't get distracted and you finish what you started. And if that's something that I see developing in that individual, I know that they're making a spiritual commitment to improving themselves. And we can start talking about applications and stuff like that. And if I don't see that in the form, and this is not me, this is not my genius or whatever, this is after thousands of years of refining that teaching. We are not the first people to ask, do we want to inadvertently introduce a bunch of uncontrollable weapons into our local community? The answer is no. And nobody ever wanted to do that, right? And they knew that this was a big problem. That you can't, a certain number of people are psychopathic. That's just a fact, right? So you can't inadvertently give them the tools they need to, if they happen to be unable to ignore the voices, then they don't know how to use a sword. So it's okay. We could just knock them out, right?
Yeah. And well, and I think too, one of the things to think about with the whole Luke and Ben dynamic is that, you know, in his enthusiasm of setting up the new Jedi Order, some of those Jedi walls that were up, he put down because he thought
Yep.
it would be there. And that's exactly what you're talking about. These things, and you know, every system
Safeguarding.
has these benchmarks that you have to cross in order to do that. Sometimes they're arbitrary, right? Sometimes they're specific to what you can do, like you have to be able to do this before you can do this and all of that kind of thing. But whatever it is, it's the progression. And like you said, when as a teacher, what you're looking for is, can somebody follow that progression to its conclusion, or do they get distracted and go off on their other things and all of that kind of thing? Damon, you got something to add?
Yeah, also you find that another thing with the disgruntled teacher is the students are maybe coming for, maybe they don't know the reason, or they think they have a reason. Like they are already showing up wanting to be the teacher, be a teacher.
Yeah.
You see this a lot, and you see it a lot, especially with the commercialization of things. You know, I mean, yoga teacher training and all this kind of stuff so easy now. You know, and then they get this thing, and then they have this, you know, I'm out for a little while, and all of a sudden I wake up and everyone has delusions of grandeur, you know, not to quote Han, but you know what I'm saying? And it's like, oh yeah, well, I see myself doing this. And I'm like, that's great that you see yourself doing that. And I admire your goal that you want to teach, which I think sometimes people get confused with a sense of service. If you have a sense of service, you're probably going to end up teaching.
Right.
However, if you are like, I want to be a teacher, well, if your cup's already full, this is an old axiom. Cup's already full, like it's just going to keep pouring over. There's nothing, no matter what I give you, if you're full with this idea, this illusion of what it is, then it's like, yeah, you know. And so that's another thing about that cooperation in the sense of like, that's a great goal. Let's put that aside now and focus on where you're at and what you're doing.
Yes.
And we'll see how that goal changes or gets realized without your sheath of illusion over it. If that makes it, if you catch my meander with that.
Yeah. Alan, you want to jump in?
Yeah, everything that Damon just said, definitely true. But a lot of the relationships that we're talking about have to be set at the beginning, and we have many examples in pop culture of the teacher-student relationship just going wrong, right? There's always, I always like to point out Mr. Miyagi was a handyman. He wasn't
Right.
he wasn't teaching his karate, he kind of disgruntledly started to teach it, and the ones that were, teachers from the beginning, go to Kung Fu Panda and Shifu. In that, he was all about teaching, and the student that he gave all his attention to became the bad guy, and then from then on, he was a disgruntled teacher teaching the Fearsome Five and all that stuff. And so it's like, well, why is this guy still teaching? Well, that's kind of his, thing. He's technically really good at it. He's created this thing, but like all of those things, like if you look at Luke, he's failed more than he succeeded. His successes were huge, but his failures are really what made him a good character, because that's kind of what resonates with us, his, by proxy, his students, right?
Yeah.
The people that idolize what he has done and what we've seen him do and all that stuff. But like baby Grogu was like, nah, I'm good. I'm gonna go back with Mando. So that's kind of that whole thing, right?
Yeah, that's that's a really good point. Yeah. Faisal, you wanted to jump in on there?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, we're not, we're not fighting an intergalactic empire, and we have a little bit more freedom to sort of explore how we want this stuff to happen. And like, when you find, because this is it's a consensual thing. People come to us and they ask us to help them, and we want to help them, which is why we make ourselves available for that in the first place. And if somebody turns up and they want to teach and they think that they know it, and like quite often, that's fine. They might even be brilliant. But it's like, we have a culture here, and that means we do things this way. And if you're on board with that and you want to, hit the assessments and get your qualifications, then you can join us on the team. But if you don't want to do that, and this was like, I'm going to bring up the Saber Accords, right? So the one that surprised me when Chad hits me with it is autonomy, because I like things done my way, right? And I find that, I'm confident that I've developed this and that, it works, and then you might have your alternatives, and fine, brilliant, I love it, but I like things here done this way, because that way we know everything. And if that's no use to people, autonomy, right? You're like, okay, on my ship, I'm captain, and if you don't want to be on this ship, that's fine. Here's a shuttle, build your own ship or find another one. It's absolutely fine. You don't have to be here if you don't want to. And if you don't like the way that I teach, or you don't want to learn the form, there's the door. You're welcome to leave. And if you want a hand setting up your own academy, let me point you at these resources. Let me direct you towards these instructors who aren't maybe perhaps quite as fussy as I am. And I trust them to give you a good foundation. Off you go. Boom. And that's kind of, because people who are awkward, I am an awkward student. I'm a nightmare, and I'm very grateful for my teacher showing the patience and not booting me out again and again and again and again. And for us as a community to be able to look after the people who are just naturally that way, they don't necessarily mean to be abrasive. That's a personality trait they have. It's a quirk of, right? Just because they don't fit, it doesn't mean we abandon them or reject them. We just try and find them alternative paths. And again, that really, to form that as a coherent strategy in my head, to say, look, I don't have to get upset because I've got this person who's hot-headed here. I'm just like, look, okay, dude, this is how it is. This is what my teacher taught me, and this is what I teach my students. And if you're not on board with that, Like, here's where you can buy some good lightsabers. Here are the masks that we recommend. You can buy them from here. And here's an amazing HEMA class that's around the corner from you. Here's an amazing, fencing class around the corner, or wushu or whatever. Boom. Autonomy, saber accords, and that it liberates us really to have that in place.
Yes. Ben, do you have anything to add to this before we move on? Because we're about to go into the opposite. We're going to go Sithy and talk about the disgruntled student and killing the master.
Yeah, I think that's probably the better direction to move right now.
Okay. All right. So yes. So there we are. So on the other end of this, we've got the disgruntled teacher, but now we've of course got the disgruntled student. And as I said, the Sith way is one of these expressions of that, where the student is expected to rise up and overcome the teacher. My teacher Gabriel had a kind of a similar little tradition, which he called the goodbye punch, which is when you thought that you knew enough to best your teacher or to do that, you would go up and you would challenge them to the goodbye punch. And if you beat them, they would let you go with a handshake and a smile. And if not, then you stayed with them. I never got to do that. But but it was offered to me. So here is some of the thoughts that I have about that. Disgruntled students, which is a very, very common theme. We've got students who are disgruntled with one teacher, go to another teacher, obviously Jedi, Sith, all of that kind of thing. What as teachers and as students who have experienced both sides of this particular coin, I'll start off the whole conversation by saying, just because your teacher is your teacher and they're giving you all of this stuff and all that stuff, like my teacher Gabriel is very dear to my heart. He led me through things. He taught me some very, very important things. But in all honesty, as a teacher, in the grand scheme of teachers, he was not great. He was sometimes unclear. He was very quick to judgment. He could be a little harsh in some ways, but these are things that me as a student dealt with as I went up. And so you always have to remember is that, especially with people that you're coming to with maybe a lot of admiration to, whatever, they're still just people, feet of clay. And we're students too. A good teacher has to be a student, right? And if they're a student, then they're going to be making mistakes. Do they learn from those mistakes? Hopefully a teacher can learn from their mistakes instantly, right? Whereas maybe a student needs a little guidance, right? So that's the thing that I will start off with, that is that teachers aren't perfect, right? And sometimes the student teacher relationship can become contentious. So I'll open the floor to people who want to go into that hornet's nest first.
So I guess been quiet through the teacher thing. So students, we had a student who came to us several years ago. I mean, this is probably 10 years ago now at this point, but maybe a little longer than that. Anyway, it was quite a while ago. And Victoria had been teaching for a while. I was much newer to teaching. But red flags, right, of a potentially disgruntled student was he had done several different styles already and had gotten to, 2-3 ranks in. And then, the teacher was holding him back, or the teacher wasn't moving it fast enough, or teacher didn't want to do the stuff that he wanted to do, and things like that. And it's like those, really quickly became red flags as we, progressed through the things. And it's like, we're doing some really basic body movement stuff. And it's like, well, it's like you put your arm down like this. Well, I wouldn't do that. You get your arm cut. It's like the whole point is to get out of the way of the sword, right? And this is if you're, somebody just comes at you with a katana and you have nothing to defend yourself with, and all you can do is duck. Right? This is how you get out of a cut. This is, and it's back to that thing. It's like, well, like Faisal said, I was like, I need you to do this so that you can, learn this thing to show me that you're going to do what I tell you to do. And that was, huge red flag. On the other hand, right, a couple of years ago, we haven't actually been teaching for a couple of years, but a couple of years ago, I had a student, and it was like I noticed he was doing something, and I said, you shouldn't do that. Oh, okay. Well, that's not what you told me before. Yeah, I know, because now you're past the last problem, right? I told you to do it this way so you get over that problem. Now we're on to another problem you have with your form, and I need you to do it this way. It's like you push them this way in the technique, and they go too far this way. And you got to
Right.
push them back this way, and the goal is eventually they end up in the perfect range, but the student had a hard time grasping that. And then I noticed, right, reflection on teachers. I noticed he was doing something I didn't like, and I asked him not to do it. And then like the next form we did, I realized I was doing that. So he was just doing what I was doing, and then I'm telling him not to do it. So I had to like tighten my form up and get a little less sloppy, because it's like I've been doing it for 20 years, so I can be sloppy as I want because like I'm just leading class. Well, that's not true, right?
Right.
So bad teacher, can very quickly lead to a bad student when you're telling them not to do something that you're doing consistently that's inappropriate. So
Yes, I've
or
got
not adequate.
yes, and for those of you who want to know something that you can go check on my sheet show videos, there is a little there's like a little movement with the blade, which is totally unintentional. It's just because I'm relaxing and going to the next one, totally unintentional, and all of a sudden it's in everybody's form. Yeah, and I have to go by and go, okay. I remember, and this is the worst part. I remember sitting down to edit that video, going, "Oh man, should I edit that out? Nah, nobody will notice it." So,
Sorry.
any other comments on that kind of stuff? Good
on-
examples, John.
On disgruntled students, yeah, I mean, first of all, at the end of the day, I do have students who could easily beat me in a match now under tournament rules, because like in order to demonstrate authority, I have to know more ways to cheat than them.
Right.
Right. So like, they're amazing. They're moving faster than I can see if I'm not paying attention. And the authority comes from you being able to shut them down. However you do that, like, it's like, okay, put the mask on, put the gloves on, like, have a go, smack. And if you can't do that anymore because you got injuries or whatever, then you should have at least one person that you can point to and say, right, okay, there's our current number 2 or number 3 ranked fighter. Put your mask, put your gloves on, get in the ring. Let's see how you do. And they don't tend to do well because it takes training. And if they that's important. That authority that comes through a demonstrable capacity to be effective under sort of contested conditions. Without that, like, you're just teaching dance. And, quite often when you have people coming in like that, if they're any good, they usually come with built-in respect for people who can show them how to be better. If they don't have that basic respect, I mean, I'm wrong sometimes, sure. I'm wrong a lot. Yeah, fine. But if they don't have that respect, you can guarantee they've never been around anybody who's demanded it.
Well, even if you can't guarantee that, it's one of those bets where you have to go, is it worth the effort? Is it worth the effort to teach somebody for 3 years and then find out that they're a deadbeat, or that they're going to take what you're going to do?
I bring you back to, it takes 3 years of dedicated study to learn the form. And it's only after they've learned the form that I'll even start assessing whether or not it's worth taking them on the deeper journey, which will eventually introduce them to my teacher. And I'm not having them embarrass me.
Yeah.
I'm not having them make me look like an idiot for insulting my teacher by introducing him to somebody who hasn't washed their hands.
Yeah.
Right? It's form. It's over thousands of years. That's what has come down. This is the alphabet. Show me your calligraphy. When that's ready, then we will start talking about grammar and spelling and poetry.
Right. All right. I think Ben, were you I think Ben was first, then we'll go to Damon.
So, as I'm thinking about places where we see tension with students, and this may be more true in the Chinese martial arts than in other ones. One of the things that strikes me is that there's very often, or I would say almost usually, a disconnect between what a teacher is expecting that they're going to teach, what they're prepared to impart, and what students are expecting that they're going to get when they walk into this class for the first time, particularly if it's their first exposure to a martial art. In that what teachers teach is a limited skill set. It's a highly focused, a highly dedicated, highly technical exercise, and it's supposed to be, right? And what students want is, something that is much more expansive. They want greater focus and clarity at work. They want a sense of community, right? They want to be able to achieve altered states of consciousness. I mean, God only knows what they all come in wanting to do. And the funny thing is that often these things are achieved as a second order, kind of as a side effect of the process of learning, right? As a side effect of the process of learning how to box and working really hard at not getting punched in the head, you become a very disciplined person, right? But you have to actually do the boxing before the discipline happens, right? That was the side effect. That wasn't actually the purpose. And it's this confusion I see over and over again that causes a lot of the tension, a lot of the disgruntlement, a lot of students wanting to jump ahead, in that they have some meta narrative that they want to accomplish, some meta lesson that they want to learn. And I keep coming back to saying, nope, we're going to work on not getting hit with the stick today. And that's actually where all the rest of this comes from. But let's just focus on not getting hit with the stick, I think you're muted again, Chip.
Oh, there we go. Yes. Totally. I totally agree with that. So yeah. Yes, we'll go over to Damon next. Yeah.
Oh, cool. So yeah, it's one thing you find a lot where it's like the difference is like, is the student really asking a question, or are they just being argumentative, or do they not know the difference? And so it's like a lot of the times it's like, oh, well, what about, I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do this. And there's a difference of like, I think what John was talking about, where it's just like, well, I wouldn't do that. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, you're here to learn this now, and that's what you signed up for, So you got to just play along. You got to cooperate, because that's what's going on. And you can do your other technique on your own time, but not now. Sorry. And that's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people, because they somehow, I don't know, maybe they think they're going to lose their sense of self or something, which is of course avoiding the stick, like Ben was just talking about. It all does come back to that. And it's I think a lot about that is this, like, okay, in their sense of trying to discover, so many people only know how to discover by offering an immense amount of resistance. Like, they're not even taught how to question. Like, their only understanding of discovery is resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes a lot. And maybe it's maybe it's like it takes 3 years, and then you realize maybe that doesn't happen, and it takes a lot of time in. The more and more we teach and evolve as teachers and get older, I think we see that coming a lot sooner than when I see it a lot sooner now than when I was a younger teacher, and I have, you could say, less tolerance for it, or maybe I have more tools to guide.
I was going to say
not be annoyed by it. You know what I mean?
I was going to say that our tolerance to it is probably goes down with age as well. The more you encounter it, the less you want to encounter it again. Anyway, all right, Alan, you're up.
So if I can go back to the beginning of this whole question about the student-teacher relationship, a lot of students, we want everything out of the relationship. One of the best things I was ever asked was, why are you doing this? Why are you here? Why are you in this class right now? Because I had to go, why am I here?
Yeah.
What is the reason I'm, learning how to dodge a punch or a stick, or, what is it about this that I went to instead of, learning archery or learning piano? All of those types of skills are repetitive, like martial arts, in order to create, beauty. Usually that's why we call it an art, right? A martial art. But there's a thing to be said about that relationship being set up at the beginning. That was one of the first things my teacher ever asked me. Like, why are you here? What's the reason that you want to learn martial arts? Okay, great. And that has been a blessing in my life, because all of my students, they know why they're there, because I asked them that. And they're like, okay, well, what is it you want to get out of this? Okay, well, then I'm going to say this right now. The I think you called it the goodbye punch.
Yeah.
Is done at the beginning for me. The same thing that Faisal said, like, hey, here's all these other places. I tell them right at the beginning, like, this might not be for you. You might go through my class and not really like this. I will not take it personally, because I've taught hundreds, if not thousands, of students. And the people that stay with me get to do this. The people that don't stay with me, they get to do that, which is also cool. But in the end, your disgruntledness, I'm not sure what the actual word is, but that's yours. It's not mine. I'm going to be here anyway. I'm going to be here swinging my sword or my lightsaber, or, punching the bob or the bag anyway. If you would like to be on this journey with me for this little bit of time, then great. But that's also the kind of examples I've had in my life. Is my teachers have all been that way, where they're like, hey, if you don't like what I'm saying, chances are there's something that happened beforehand that's not going to work for you. And a lot of the techniques and the things that we learn, if a sword is coming at you from this angle and this thing, and your sword just happens to be in this position, you would do this technique. All of that applies to other pieces of your life, right? Like, how do you put your taxes in an arm bar? I don't know. Okay, well, are you doing your taxes right now? No, you're in an arm bar. So let's talk about the arm bar right now. So that's kind of the idea, is like what Ben said. This is the focus, the same amount of focus, that it takes to achieve or solve that problem. You have to bring into this problem. I was always taught that the body can change the mind. The mind has a really hard time changing the mind. So we sit in a horse stance, and then if we talk about depression, you're not thinking about depression. You're thinking about your legs shaking like Elvis. You're thinking about how, why did I let this madman talk me into being in a horse stance? It's like, no, welcome to right now. Right now, you're with me. Right now, we're strengthening our core, strengthening our foundation. Okay, now the class is over. How can I help you with your taxes? I'm not an accountant. You don't want to talk to Sheila about that. That sort of thing.
Yeah. The I would say one thing with the goodbye punch, that it doesn't have to do with being disgruntled. That's like if you're done with your thing. And all of my teachers have been very informal, so they all expected you to go out and see other things, you know, and bring them back and say, hey, what about this and all that. So I was very lucky that I got that type of, you know, that type of thing. But I think one thing that should be really important, because I know I was I'll give you my, before I'll give to you Faisal here, I see that, but I'll give you my story of being disgruntled. And so my current teacher right now, I've got him in more recently, but my Gabriel was the one I really had the relationship with. And when I wanted to get into sword, he would not let me. He didn't think I was physically there yet, right? And it took me, you know, I was going to defy him. I was just going to do all this stuff. I would do all this kind of stuff. And it took me a little bit to just be like, all right, we'll just focus on this, right? And we'll focus on this instead of that. And we'll trust him. And I quite frankly, I think you know, looking back on it, he was 100% right. That's exactly what should have been done. And I know that, like, some people get, now I don't do this like this, but not this long, but a lot of people freak out when they hear that I wasn't even allowed to think about fighting for at least 3 years into my training. So, like, the idea that you would immediately like be doing a class for a couple of months and then going out, and that's out of the question. Now I don't necessarily do that long, that arbitrarily. Now I make sure that they are ready to get into that kind of situation, and I base it on a couple of things. But I will not let people go until they are ready, like Faisal was saying before. And that can be a point of frustration, I know, for a lot of students. Like John was saying, you correct them this way and they go a little too far this way, and so you have to constantly go back and forth, and you sound like you're contradicting yourself, you know. But it's just like, yeah, it's like, well, last time you said I was too high, well, now you're too low. It's like there is both. So so that's the thing. Okay, Faisal, let's throw it over to you.
So first of all, yeah, one of my instructors, Ben, has just messaged me and said I should mention, just literally as you said, the same thing. So we don't allow people to spar until they've passed their level 2 assessment, right? So people come in and they expect to show us, well, I've watched the film 12 times, I am Anakin Reborn, right? And I'm just, I strap myself in every time. I said, show me balancing on one leg. And it all comes apart, right? And so we teach, you know, because we're a Tai Chi school in disguise, right? So what we do is we make sure we're teaching people how to walk and how to breathe and how to stand and how to listen to their bodies, and how to have this internal relationship with their body, not just like, you know, how hard can I hit, how heavy can I lift kind of thing. It's, we want them to let go of those other things before and when they've done that, they can do the walking properly. When they've done that, you're like, all right, okay, now we're going to pressure test you with combat, right? And it comes complete circle. It doesn't matter if you go this way and you start with the hard stuff and eventually arrive at the soft stuff, or we choose to go through the soft stuff to arrive at the hard stuff, precisely because that addresses some of the psychosi that emerge along the path in a slightly different order. But the main thing I really wanted to say was Alan's question, like, why are we here? Right? And then I thought, what is it? Like, what I love teaching, and I wouldn't have my life any other way. If money was not a concern, if like I found a 2-ton lump of gold, I wouldn't change a thing. I'd have a better studio to teach from, but this is what I'd be doing. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that there's something in particular that I want people to know about, that I think will help all of us to be together in a better way. And, you know, when I was growing up at that time in my life, we didn't understand neurodivergence, but it's becoming quite clear there are a lot of different templates for human mentality. And, you know, what Kung Fu, what the movement arts, the martial arts in particular, because it comes with an intent that's quite specific. By learning to engage in that moment, by allowing yourself to explore altered states through exercise and through the drills that change the way I relate to the universe, that is what allowed me to evolve into the person that I am. And if I hadn't been taught the skills that my teacher had passed down to me, primarily this whole business of softness being the response, fight fire with water, that as a philosophical concept, it's taken me 30 years. I still get it wrong a lot, but I'm a lot better at it. I get luckier the more that I practice, But that entire thing of giving people the opportunity, look, guys, you don't have to fight fire with fire. Just stop, think. You don't kick the door down, just pick the lock. There's a way through here. If we think about it and we just settle down, we'll solve climate change. We'll solve, international crisis by working together. And in order to do that, we have to understand who we are. And to do that, you put yourself and bring yourself into that moment. And if I can get as many people as possible just to stop, and we all breathe and go, "You're hungry? Do you want something to eat?" And that's not education. That's not teaching someone how to do their accounts. That's not teaching somebody how to read Shakespeare, right? But it's something that can only I found for myself. And there must be other people out there like me who are in as much trouble as I was at that point in my life. I was riding motorcycles and playing in rock bands, and I should be dead or in jail. And somehow Kung Fu gave me the tools to not only survive, but to thrive through that, despite any of the idiosyncrasies of the way my brain happens to be wired. And I look out at the street and I see, kids leaving school and people driving through traffic like they're on fire and whatever. And I'm just like, oh God, guys, just breathe. I just want you to chill for a second and think about what you're doing.
Well,
right? That's why we do it.
Yes, so that's a good point here, and we'll to wrap up this particular question. And then I Ben has a good one to reel us in here to the end, which is at the end of the day, if you're a student studying under a teacher, understand that you will be frustrated with them at certain points, but you have to understand that if you're with a good teacher, if you're with one of us, if you're with somebody who is like us, who behaves in this way or says stuff like us or whatever, I can guarantee you that the reason that they're doing whatever it is that they're doing that is giving you that consternation is they're doing it for your benefit, right? I know that sounds, trite or whatever, but it's true, right? Sometimes as a teacher, you have to learn how to give the student their hard lesson, right? To bring the Star Wars analogy into it, everybody's got their cave, right? And, Luke failed his test in the cave. So the road is littered with people who've done this for 6 months. Yeah, John, did you have something quick?
Yeah, on that, if you're frustrated with a teacher because they're picking on you too much, or they're correcting you too much, or you're doing it good and they want you to do it somehow magically better than you can do it, that's because they know you can, right? And they care. They want you to do better. As teachers, that's our job. We don't, it's like if you're in a sea of, a good example is, I'll use Mr. Obata as an example because he's the example I have. If we're in a sea of at a seminar and there's 30 people there, and he picks out the middle rank student that's been doing it for a couple of years and is just a couple steps up and is okay, but is sure they know what they're doing, and everybody knows the brown belt, right? That knows exactly what they're doing, right? They've been doing it for 3 years, and they're they got it, right? They have just enough power and just enough technique to be like really dangerous, but not enough control.
Mm-hmm.
And if he's constantly picking on that person, one, you're an example, right, to the rest of the class, because you can be, right? You can be an example and improve to show other people how to improve, but also that, like, you're going to get the lesson, right? You're going to be able to make that improvement. It might take some time and you're going to have to work at it, of course, right? But it's available to you. Whereas, like, the person this is their first seminar and they've only been doing it for 6 months, is like, it's, other than a couple of polite words, it's totally lost on them, right? It's just the way humans work.
Yeah.
So if you're getting picked on by the teacher, right, it's probably because that teacher knows you can be better and they're trying to help you get there. So, you get to, or, if you're not getting the attention, it's probably because you need to do what they already told you to do. Or if or if you're not advancing, if you're not moving on to the next thing, it's like you still got work to do on what you're doing. So there's a whole lot of that
Yeah.
A student, that as a student, that's how you avoid becoming the disgruntled student, right? Is you accept that, your issues with your teacher are probably there because the teacher's trying to do something, right, to help you, because that's, like Faisal said, that's what we're here to do.
Yeah.
My wife and I have been paying to teach other people swordsmanship for 20 years. We've never made any money at it.
Yeah.
We literally pay for a dojo that, that we've kept since we haven't been teaching for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
But we still pay to keep the dojo there.
Yep. I've been spending thousands of dollars on these trips this year and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so all of this together, Ben's got a good question for all of us. Go ahead, Ben. How are we going to wrap this here talk up?
Well, as I've listened to the things that have come up, right, I think that the kind of bringing together the Star Wars side and the martial arts side, I think the real question that we as martial artists, but also as Star Wars fans, what we need to ask ourselves is this what destroyed the Jedi Order? Was the Jedi Order ultimately brought down by their systematic failure to actually regulate and have good teacher-student relationships? Is this what brings the Order down? And the same could be said of the Sith, right? Because the Sith Order goes only slightly after, and it turns out Palpatine made a terrible miscalculation with his selection and training of his student. So is this the real lesson of the franchise? Does the franchise actually come down to a morality tale about teachers and students, and what happens when this is good, and what can really terribly happen when this is bad?
Yeah, and I think yep, and those questions are definitely asked in the recent Ahsoka. Faisal, you had something to jump in on.
I think Ben, I think the short answer from my camp is no. I honestly believe that we have lots of really good examples of positive, nurturing relationships between students and teachers, and yes, there were errors, blah blah blah. But if you were to ask me why the Jedi and the Sith collapsed, it's because they succumbed to the tribalism of their own group identities. Like, they were choosing one side of the Force. Neither embraced the whole thing. It was always going to fracture. It was always going to implode on both sides, because you can't pick and choose. You choose the Force, you choose all of it. And as soon as you say this flag and that flag, well, the light side has to acknowledge the existence of the dark side in order for there to be completeness. You can't deny that. I mean, it's Jungian psychology. If you just say, I'm not going to acknowledge the part of me that gets hungry and is an animal, I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist, I am just this virtuous creature, blah, 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 it's going to come and bite you in the ass when you're not expecting it. That's 101. That's what I thought. I thought the teacher-student relationships were brilliant.
Oh, well, so I would say, I would tend to agree with Ben that it's that kind of, because by the time we see them, even throughout the Clone Wars, yes, you have good, and we were talking about this earlier, you have some good individual teacher-student relationships, right? But look at how fragile they are. As soon as Ahsoka gets into trouble, the Jedi just abandon her, right? They just throw her right under the bus. And that's the reason she ended up leaving the Jedi Order, right? If Ahsoka had not left the Jedi Order, would that have affected Anakin and his fall? You know, and that failure of the Jedi Order is what Ben is saying. They're not attending to, they're just basically going through the motions. And while the motions are good enough and they have those core values kind of behind them, right? And it will happen. Like Ahsoka had two amazingly great teachers, who she had wonderful relationships with, right? Both Plo Koon and Anakin. So
I agree. I think Ben's really onto something. I think certainly that's why the Sith Order fell.
yes,
And I think the Jedi Order, there are a lot of reasons why they fell. I think the linchpin of their destruction is their inability to deal with Anakin, right? As a whole. Not that Obi-Wan wasn't a good enough teacher for him, but because he wasn't the right teacher, and the Jedi Order as a whole didn't know what to do with him.
yeah,
Right? We'll put you on the council because that's what Palpatine wants, but we're not going to make you a master. Well, right? And not give you this arbitrary rank that nobody cares about, right? I mean, only the Jedi care about. But Palpatine absolutely did 100% not deal with Anakin the way he should have to really get him under his thumb, because he totally didn't understand that, you know, in a Sith way, is like he wasn't fully committed. He was for a long time, but you know, I'm sure there are plenty of traditional tales in every culture. Thank you, Machiavelli, for pointing this out. That you absolutely completely wipe out a family, right? If you're going to take out a family, you take them out. And Palpatine missed that, right? I mean, but that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to get rid of all of Anakin's attachments, right? Where the Jedi didn't want him to have any in the first place, so he couldn't miss them. Palpatine wanted him to have him and then take him away. And he didn't. He failed. And he just assumed that he already had everything taken care of. And that was one of Palpatine's first big mistakes. His second big mistake was apparently being brought back in a horrible movie. But but the idea that the Jedi, I don't think that's necessarily the lesson. To jump onto the last point, I don't think that's the lesson of the franchise, is that, you know, it's like bad teachers destroy galaxies. It's that you know, you have to, good teachers can make mistakes, and good students can make mistakes, and that can lead, I guess, to the galaxy surviving or not surviving.
I think we'll forget the really terrible movie, but I think going back to the Last Jedi, one of the things, I'm not a huge fan of Last Jedi, but I really like the themes that they did, and one of the things that they were doing was talking about that you know, in reality, it's a balancing act between two poles. It's not, you know, it's not binary, it's bipolar, right? And so it's not where there's just two choices, it's this gradation between two extremes, you know. And I think I would say that the lesson, not necessarily bad teachers destroy galaxies, but more of the way that we attend to the next generation and to carrying on certain values and stuff like that matters, right? And that handing things down and stuff. And I think even with this new stuff with Mandalorian, you know, and the very big thing with their culture and all that kind of thing, being pushed forward. And then of course with Ahsoka and all of the concentration on the student teacher relationship between, who is it, Balen Skull and Shin Hati and Ahsoka and Sabine, Ezra and Sabine, Ezra and Kanan, even though Kanan wasn't in it, you know. Yeah, so I think that all of these, and I guess to a certain extent, the Night Sisters, and Morgan, but to a lesser extent. Anyway, anybody else have thoughts on that one?
Just
Oh yeah,
I'm gonna bring it. Yeah, Palpatine teaching Vader. I mean, Vader came kind of as a complete package and was exploited for a couple of decades after that point. You know, it's like, what did Palpatine actually teach? What was that relationship other than a setup from the beginning? You know.
well, I think the conceit is that he was teaching him the things of the dark side and that kind of thing, the stuff that was not taught by the Jedi. But you're right. As far as skills and all the basics and stuff, he is a pretty complete package, right?
Right.
I guess he was like learning what Jedi Aikido, right?
I mean,
he's already mastered an art. Now he's got this to.
I'll bring it back again. So if you look at the light side protagonists and their relationships, and like, you know, Kanan and Ezra was a fantastic story. That, I mean, that was where Ezra came from and where he was when he chose and made the decisions at the end of that story. That was really good. And I think, and the nature of their interactions with Bendu. What was Bendu? What was going on there? And they've been hinting at this, and we see that hint in episode 7 and episode 8. And I was so desperately hoping that Rey and Kylo were somehow going, not the way that it was, but they were going to talk about a balanced place of the Force, an identity that encompassed all of it. And that was what was going to stop the endless eternal war between light side and dark side. But
that's what they started in Last Jedi.
And they never went there. And so,
yeah,
you know, again,
he just decided that, you know, this other movie doesn't need to exist, right?
Well, I don't get it.
Yeah, I'm on my film rant right now. The idea that a filmmaker would do a sequel to another movie and completely disregard the previous movie is just bad form in my mind. Like, what kind of jerk are you? Anyway, go ahead, Alan, or John. Who was first?
Go ahead, John.
No, please go.
Okay, I was just going to say that I agree that it wasn't just the teacher-student relationship that destroyed both orders. They were definitely a big part of it, but a lot of it is in how we tell stories, right, and why we tell stories that try to make sense of, you know, the world that we have. So as viewers, you know, we take from those stories what resonate with us. So for a martial artist that has had a teacher-student relationship with, you know, in our own lives, we look at that and go, that's a lesson, you know, whereas somebody that's really into, you know, putting together their own cars, like the Millennium Falcon's my jam, you know, there's so many layers and things to love and not love about, you know, this universe, you know, that we're talking about. But really the takeaway from it is, yes, from a certain point of view, yes, everything. Yeah, is that the main story? Yes, because that's the main story to you. You know, maybe you are estranged from your family and find yourself in a desert somewhere, you know, talking to an old wizard, whatever. Maybe that's your story, but maybe your story is like, no, actually, I agree with Ben Solo. Burn the past. The past is only giving me pain. I want to create something new. Maybe that's your story. Maybe that's what resonates with you. So, you know, in the end, what destroyed the Jedi Order? What destroyed the Sith Order? Not seeing the whole, like Faisal said. You know, every great steak ends up in the toilet eventually. You know,
there's also there's also the canon that they did where the whole prophecy wasn't even about the Jedi Order or the
Yeah.
Sith. It was about the whole Mortis thing,
Yeah.
right? And like after that, it's like, oh well. So basically, and this is one thing I really loved. It's like, well, then they're basically following this kind of nonsensical thing for like no reason. Like,
Right.
yeah, you know. But
Right, but in the end, though, like I said, it's from certain points of view. There were definitely Jedi that left the Order because they agreed that no, this is not the way it's supposed to be. You know, Dooku is only one of many in even in canon. You know, I know they wrote a lot of them out in Legends, but even in canon, Dooku was one of many that said
Sure.
this is not the way it's supposed to go. You know, and it's that sort of thing. I mean, look at that relationship as far as teacher student, right? Palpatine and Dooku, like, well, technically they succeeded. You know, so it may not have ended up the way we ultimately wanted, but hey, you know what? The dude did it for about 30 years.
Well, yeah, so that's the thing. If you're really on this whole thing about the Force attaining balance or something like that, then they did. They attained balance, because if I counted correctly, we've got what in the original trilogy, right? Without all of this added stuff, we got to remember that we've got a whole bunch of added stuff now that has made this universe way bigger, right? But the teacher student thing was definitely a central theme through those first three movies, which is really good. But yes, technically, there were two Sith, two Jedi. That seems pretty balanced to me. But but now we know about like all these others and all this other stuff, whatever. But at the time, it becomes that kind of thing. Like, I formed my opinions before all of this new stuff came in, so I'm still kind of stuck in that realm, that old fogey type of thinking with the original trilogy and stuff like that. But no, you're totally right, and you get that, but you still do have the teacher relationship going on with Mando. And even though Grogu said, Luke, you're nothing, he still went back to Mando to continue his training. So
who, by the way, told him to go fight a kid like
right.
almost immediately.
Right.
Because Star Wars is about nothing if not the training of child soldiers. That's
right. There you go.
Core, part of the franchise.
Yes. We talk about that all the time. That Ahsoka is essentially a child soldier, and that's a pretty dark storyline. So, as John, I saw Faisal had one, but maybe that was up for later. Okay, John, go ahead.
So you mentioned the teacher mentor arc through the first three movies, right? The relationship to Luke and so on and so forth. And I just, to the point of the discussion, if George was a student of and his name just fled my mind, of the Hero with a Thousand Faces, and
Joseph
literally, Star Wars
You're talking about Joseph Campbell.
Joseph Campbell, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
A important part in the hero's journey, right, is that he meets a mentor, and that mentor carries him through however many gates until like the mentor has to leave so that the hero can continue his way, right? And this is in the original trilogy, right? Because we're all old. It's like it's obviously Yoda and Obi Wan or Ben, but also Han. Right, Han really becomes a bit of a mentor to him, and kind of shows him some things, and in some ways also Leia becomes a mentor to him. Yeah. Right, she's certainly tough and feisty in a way. So he has all these, in fact, Leia's the last mentor he talks to before he says, "No, I have to go do this," and she's like, "You don't have to do this." Right, this is it's like, you can just go away, and he's like, "I can't." Right, he's made up his mind. So the idea that back to the original thing of who's our teacher, who's a mentor, who's a master. It becomes, it's certainly within Star Wars and certainly within real life, very nebulous, right? And that I guess I don't have much more of a point than that, other than it really ties into this myth this myth cycle that was very much in the front of George's mind when he wrote Star Wars. He even, by his own admission and by Joseph Campbell's admission, is Lucas was one of his best students and really got the core of his concept of his philosophy about this anthropological idea.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's key to that thing. Even the eventual arrival at Last Jedi, right? Which makes the follow of Rise of Skywalker a little bit more egregious to me, because it's such a natural, it's like, okay, the next one is going to naturally tie it all up because we've got it all set up, just like a traditional story cycle. And well, anyway, Faisal, go ahead.
Yeah, just so we're talking about teachers and students and stuff again, and I'm just suddenly reminded of that scene of the kid who reaches out and the broom comes to his hands at the end, and there was no teachers there. The Force finds a way. It's almost like dinosaurs breeding. Like the Force will find a way to imbue that knowledge into somebody without there being any transmission from another individual. I was really hoping something else would come. That will presumably be the story about Rey and going finding all these individuals with the gift and starting another Jedi Order or something. But the point being that kid had no teacher. It was just there, just waiting to be realized.
Yeah, I always have the I always tell everybody that we are all Broom Boy. We're all, yeah, Broom Boy does live, yes. So like the whole thing is that he was inspired, right? And much like me watching an old Jackie Chan movie when I was 5 years old, I was like, I didn't have a teacher. I didn't even know my mom did martial arts. I just knew that this was really cool and I wanted to do it, so I rolled around the house trying to do flips and stuff. So I believe that everybody that has done martial arts or has done any sword work is inspired in some way, whether it be the Force or the Princess Bride, whatever it is, that is really what inspires us to become that student, to want to learn how to do that. So yeah, definitely, I'm more in the camp of yes, whatever your inspiration, whatever the reason you want to be a student, again, to come back to why are you here? Maybe you don't know, maybe you don't have the words yet, but that's what a good teacher is there to bring out of you. So.
All right. Okay. Well, we are at the end of the 2 hours here. I think that's been a really good talk here. Ending here, just to be clarified, we are talking about the Force, being imbued, and that kid didn't have a teacher and everything like that. A teacher is important. A teacher knows things that you don't know, right? He knows things that you don't know. That's the big one. But anyway, so there we go. Great talk here, everybody. Thank you, John, Ben, Alan, Faisal, and Damon, and thank you to Gene Cheng for showing up for as much as you could. Thanks to you all out there for tuning in. Patience, practice, perseverance. We'll see you next time. Happy sabering.